What is the impact of a single moment on a life? How do our choices reveal our character? The book 102 Minutes, written by Jim Dwyer and Kevin Flynn, contains true stories about the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers that happened on September 11, 2001. The two writers included many stories about survivors and deaths that happened on this awful day. Some of the characters that were focused on in the book were firefighters. Flynn and Dwyer wrote, on the 19th floor, dozens of exhausted firefighters were taking a breather, a startling sight to Captain Joseph Bosselieri of the Corps Officers Academy and the two sergeants, Andrew Winder and Al Mosca, who had rushed into the building with him. This helps answer the question because the moment the planes hit the buildings, everyone's lives changed. It was the firefighters' duty to rescue the suffering people from the building that was about to collapse. This quote helps us realize that this event was mentally and physically difficult, even for the firefighters. It also tells the reader that many people risk their own lives to help others, which demonstrates selflessness. Another quote from 102 Minutes stated, several blocks away at the Corps Officers Academy, Joseph Bosselieri grabbed two sergeants and began running toward the Trade Center. Even though Bosselieri was a Corps officer and it was his duty to save the people in the building, he immediately ran to the building without hesitating. When the first plane struck, the only thing the officer was worried about was getting the people out of the building, even if it meant he was risking his own life. This moment shows that Bosselieri's life was automatically changed. It also shows that he wasn't thinking about himself at the time and was more worried about others.
In the book Of Mice and Men, George and Lenny are best pals from the very beginning. They have a dream of having their own farm in which they will live off the fruit of the land. George and Lenny's dream is put at risk late in the book when Lenny and Curly's wife are talking in the barn. Curly's wife allows Lenny to stroke her soft hair. Lenny begins stroking with much strength. Curly's wife tells him to stop, and Lenny only panics, covering her mouth and beginning to shake her. He shook her then, and he was angry with her. "Don't you go yelling," he said, and he shook her, and her body flopped like a fish. And then she was still, for Lenny had broken her neck. This choice Lenny made ultimately destroyed any chance George and Lenny had of living on their own farm. Lenny may not have been aware of the harm he was doing to Curly's wife, but his mistake in the single moment led to his ultimate fate and the end of his dream with George. Lenny's choice reveals that he is unaware of his own power and strength and does not understand the harm it does to others. Learned about Curly's wife's death, they began to search for Lenny. Curly was outraged and wanted revenge on Lenny, but George was not going to let this happen. George knew where to find Lenny and went to the spot they agreed to meet. When George found Lenny, instead of making a run for it, George had Lenny look down the river and vision their dream farm. George began to describe the farm to Lenny, and then took the gun Curly gave him from his pocket and pointed it at Lenny's head. The hand shook violently, but his face set and his hand steadied. He pulled the trigger. The crash of the shot rolled up the hills and rolled down again. Lenny jarred and then settled slowly forward to the sand, and he lay without quivering. George's action in this single moment marked the end of his lifelong friendship with Lenny. This choice reveals that George is willing to do the right thing, even if it is the harder choice to make. George put Lenny to a peaceful death, which is not the way it would have been had Curly found him.
Next is the poem To a Mouse, written by Robert Burns. To a Mouse is about a man who accidentally turns up a mouse's nest. The mouse is terrified after this happens. Instead of leaving the mouse feeling no guilt, he faces his guilt by writing this poem. Usually when it comes to rodents such as mice, people try to get rid of them by setting up traps, but this man was different. He felt bad about what he had done. He thinks about what it would be like to be the mouse. The author writes, "At me, thy poor earth-born companion and fellow mortal," which suggests that the mouse is equal to the man and deserves the same respect as he does. Also written in the poem is, "I'm truly sorry man's dominion has broken nature's social union," which shows that the man feels bad for the way people have started treating nature. Now that the plower has sympathy and guilt for the mouse and understands why the mouse is terrified, he realizes how much the world has ruined the natural part of Earth.
A modern example of the impact of a single moment on lives is the Parkland shooting. Not only the lives of kids and families in Parkland were changed, but the lives of people all around the world. Many kids live in the fear that the same thing will happen to them while they are at school. The choice the Parkland shooter made reveals his own unethical character, and the choice we make about how to react to it reveals our own character.
In conclusion, a single moment impacts a person's life and reflects on their character. Using 102 minutes of Mice and Men, To a Mouse, and the Parkland shooting, it's clear that a moment can have a positive or negative result. 102 Minutes and Of Mice and Men both showed a positive and negative impact, while Of a Mouse showed a positive and the Parkland shooting showed a negative impact.